Hi and welcome to Refactoring a Design System Component. And this evening we are going to talk about the refactoring of one of our most used components in the Swedish tax agency's design system. And tax agency is Skatteverket på svenska. Through usability and accessibility testing, we discovered that one of our components wasn't accessible and needed some work. And we wanted to share our process and some of the lessons we've learned. And this slide shows an image of us, our names, and where we work. And on stage today, it's me, Andrea Berglund. I'm an accessibility specialist and a developer from the consulting company Omega Point.
And my name is Emma Palmgren, and I'm from Frog, part of Capgemini event, UX designer and accessibility specialist. And Andrea and I, we have been working in the same team at the Swedish tax agency for about 3 years now, designing, developing, and maintaining its design system. And for this presentation, we're going to assume that you know what a design system is. I'm not going to put in time on that.
No, okay. So first, some background. The slide has the heading background, expandable table component, and it shows 2 images of the component being used in 2 different applications before the refactoring. And one part of our design system is our component library. It's a set of reusable UI components that can be used in different applications around the agency. And one of our components is called the Expandable table, and was one of the first that was included into the design system. And it has been used in many different applications, both as a table component and as a layout component. And when we tested it more thoroughly, we found that it had many accessibility flaws. The most prominent one was discovered when testing with screen reader JAWS. We realized that the reader could not reach any of the component's expanded content. So we decided that we needed to take a step back and do a complete refactoring. So what did that process look like? And I'm now showing a slide that visualizing the process from start to finish. And the first step of the process was that we began gathering an understanding of the requirements, which led to the second step, where we needed to answer questions about the component's semantics. And in the third step, we needed to remind ourselves about our other non-functional requirements. And after that, we could begin our 4th, 5th, and 6th step that were design, develop, and test, which led to some redesign and more develop and test, until we were confident with a first version that we rolled out. And rollout is the last step of the process.
And now we're showing an image of the non-refactor table being used in a different contexts. And to start with, we needed to understand the requirements. And as mentioned, the component was sometimes used for table-like data, and sometimes it was used more as a layout component. After looking at some of the ways it was being used, we found that it was sometimes hard to map the requirements to the right semantics. And it was in fact, sorry, I lost myself. And was it an expandable table or was it a complex list? So we decided it was time to test. We created an example page in HTML and tested it with some screen reader users to better understand the semantics and use cases. We built 3 examples based on 3 real applications at Skatteverket using the component. One with salary data, one with the function of selecting multiple rows, for example, documents, and one with events in a list. For most of the use cases, the semantic made most sense with a table, with the functionality of being able to expand a row to reveal more information. So semantically, we chose it's a table.
Exactly. And this slide is now showing the visualization of the process again, where the third step has, that was non-functional requirements is highlighted. So where are we now in the process? We investigated the requirements, which led to a bunch of questions about the correct semantics. And after landing in a hypothesis of which semantic we should use, we also needed to look at the other non-functional requirements. And the first requirement as a tax agency is security. We need to make sure that we don't open up to any security risk. For example, by using some third-party dependency that can't be trusted. The second one is accessibility, the requirement that started this refactoring. And the third one is that we need to make sure that what we build is possible to track, and track events from with Matomo, Google Analytics, or like. And the fourth requirement is maintainability. We want to reuse what we can and remove unnecessary complexity to make our design system as easy to maintain as possible. And the last one is the developer experience. We want to build our components in a way that makes them easy to use. And all of these requirements needs to be considered when we design and develop our components.
This slide shows an illustration of an agile team effort. And this kind of large refactoration of a complex component required effort from our whole team. It was a joint venture between visual design, UX design, development, accessibility testing, with daily cooperations throughout the different disciplines and roles. Together we pieced together. This was the most time-consuming part of the process, and as we continuously tested and iterated our design and code until reaching a first version that we could be proud of. So let's look at the old and the refactored version of the component to understand what changed. So the slide is showing the same example of the table in the old and in the refactored version. First of all, the old component was built with a combination of divs visually assembled as a table, but the new one is now correctly semantic HTML table. Visually, we wanted to make the component even more distinctly table-like. This was achieved by cleaner framing and lines with increased contrast. To make text hierarchy visually clearer, heading size was increased to be larger than the cell text. And also, a previous functionality was that every row was clickable before, with a small chevron in the right end, which was not visible to the users when we tested it. So we removed the clickability functionality for the whole row and instead put in a button in one of the cells with better contrasts and also better icon, the same icon but with better contrasts and larger, and also added a text to the button so that the user would know what to do and what to expect behavior. We also enhanced thickness and lines in the frames. In this example, we have an application with selectable rows, and in the new example, one of the rows is expanded. Previously, there was no frame surrounding the expanded object, which made it difficult for the users to associate the expanded row with its contents. The new design boxes it better. An HTML table is quite rigid in what it allows in its different elements, and the checkbox for choosing all of the rows in the table was previously placed inside of the table, but caused confusion for screen reader users because they associated the alley label for the checkbox as the header for the column. So we detached the choose all checkbox and put it outside of the table instead and left the implementation of this functionality to the teams. This slide shows a last example of the table used in a list context. This example is from my pages at skatteverket.se, mina sidor. Contextually, this could be interpreted as a list. However, tests showed it also worked well as a table. We think the redesign of this component was successful, largely due to building our assumptions and design based on user and team needs, continuously mapping existing data in our new design, and strengthening our hypothesis through testing with real data, and also helping our design decisions be correct.
So, we have now reached the last step of the process, which is the rollout. And the refactoring had made us decide to deprecate the old component to see so the functionality of expanding and selecting table rows was built into our main table component. And this major change demanded us to be very clear in our communication to the team using the old component, that it was not accessible and that they should change the implementation and use the new component as soon as possible. And we communicated through different channels, and we offered support and wrote extensive documentation. We also showed our progress along the way, so the change would not come as a surprise. And we also informed about the change and the reason behind it in different forums, like a UX community of practice and a large demo at the tax agency. Presentations much like this one. So, to wrap this up, we want to share some of our lessons learned. And the first one is take the time. We realized early that it wasn't an easy task. When we started feeling sure about an implementation, we realized in other tests with other assistive technologies that it wasn't working as expected. During implementation, we tested with JAWS on our PC, but then when testing with VoiceOver on Mac, it worked completely different. The version now in production is miles better than our old version, but there is still room for improvements. And one part that made this task more challenging was the choice of technology in the design system. So the second lesson we want to share is make sure your architecture and technology decisions support your needs. Because a decision was made early in the development of the design system to build UI components as web components with Shadow DOM. And this technical decision has increased the amount of time needed for accessibility testing. It has also forced us to make more complex solutions in our components to make them accessible. And to be clear, it is not the problem with the fact that we build web components, but with the way we've chosen to implement Shadow DOM. And the last lesson.
As you probably already know, accessibility really is a team effort. So beyond involving team colleagues with different expertises and abilities in order to get all the dimensions of the task, we also needed to involve all the teams using the component, the old version of the component, their work and the application of the component in their services and solutions. And their knowledge was essential for us in order to make good decisions, design decisions in regards to the refactorization. And without their help, the solution would not have been as successful. So these are a few of our learnings. Thank you for listening to us, and feel free to reach out if you have any more questions.